cousin, Clee Tilman. He is a son, a father, a brother, a law officer, an accomplished author.
And 4 over and out. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you guys for tuning in. Most of you most of the faithful followers know what this is. This is the lab that has transitioned on to Black and Blue. We used to have people on the show where we talked about businesses, products, and positive messages. Now we focus on African-American police officers and their experiences throughout the course of their career, whether they are rookies, whether they're seasoned, or whether they are retired. All right. So this is your opportunity to hear stories from a different side, a different point of view, and also for you to ask your questions. We got a special guest in the lab. Some of you may know him, some of you may not, but I'll introduce him here in a minute. Right now, we're streaming on Facebook, 2 pages. We're on Coach Clee. We are on Black and Blue. We are on LinkedIn under Clee Tilman. We are on YouTube. We are on YouTube twice under Black and Blue and the Clee Tilman page. Make sure you guys check those out. Subscribe. Make sure you guys follow the content. We got a lot of good interviews that are coming down the pipeline. We got a good one tonight, and we have some that we already took care of a couple months ago. We took a 2-week hiatus of just getting back from vacation, just getting back from a friend of mine's wedding. It's just been a nice long run of hanging out, exciting, relaxing, and peacefulness. You guys know. Make sure you guys check out the website. It's scrolling below. It is workwithclee.com, and one of our sponsors is on that website as well, One Way Publishing. So if you ever had the desire of writing a book, One Way Publishing can get it done for you. They can take a mere thought and turn it into a book that's bought. So make sure you guys check that out. All right. We also have a couple books. One of the books that was published by me, let me guys show you. I got to show you. I got to get the sponsors out there. I got to go ahead and show. Let me show you this commercial here. Make sure that we're living in a world where a lot of people are holding grudges, where a lot of people are angry. And Les Brown said it best. If you hold on to a grudge, it's like holding on to a hot piece of coal and expecting the person you're mad at to feel the effects, when really you need to just let that thing go and start the healing process. Just check this out quick, and we'll be right back. Some things got to get out the way. Without any further ado, I need you guys to hit the like button, hit the share button, subscribe. I'm glad you guys are tuning in. We got a special guest. You already see the name is Jermaine Harris. He's a sergeant with the Chicago Police Department. He's been sergeant in law enforcement for 19 years. He's also been in the United States Marine Corps, where I kind of talked to him briefly backstage, where he was in for 4 years, and that taught him a world of leadership that he would not have gotten without going through the service itself. Ladies and gentlemen, drop some ones in the comment section. Drop some ones. I'm gonna bring them to the stage right now. Jermaine, are you here?
Hey, Clee, how's it going, brother? Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being available. I'm excited to have you here on Black and Blue. We're going to have a wonderful discussion. But first and foremost, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
All right. So again, Jermaine Harris. I'm a sergeant with Chicago Police Department, 19 years on the job. So working in Chicago, big city, urban city, a lot of challenges, a lot of concerns around, just making our community safer, which is one of the main reasons why I love doing this job so much. So I'm here working in the same community I grew up in, having an opportunity to patrol those streets. I ran and had fun as a kid and got into some trouble, but now being on in a way to positively impact my community. So it's a great job, dream job. I really love doing it. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. And I know, likewise, I know we kind of know briefly about our backstories. The department I work for, I ran the same streets as well. To be a public servant in a community where you grew up and you got to see people come and go, you got to see people grow up and mature, and you got to see some other negative things that happen to other people too. And it's a good feeling to actually give back. So I understand what you're saying. How long did you want to be a police officer?
Oh, man, so growing up on the west side of Chicago, in this space, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. So I'm, Generation X during that time. So we also know what was going on in urban cities, right? Crack epidemic. So a lot of these issues and the things around relationships with police, I had never had a positive interaction, positive encounter. So being a police officer was the last thing that was on my mind. So actually, I'm a little bit of an artist. I dabble in the arts a little bit. And so going through high school, it was actually my dream. It was to be an architect. So, but I learned, like, just during that time, like, passion is so important. I was good at it, but I didn't love it. Like, I couldn't see myself every single day, doing that type of work. So I really needed something to be able to expose what that passion was to me. And so I know your dad was a big part of you, right? And kind of getting you where you wanted to be. So my dad offered up some advice. He was like, hey, check out the Marines, right? Help get you some direction. So he kind of gave me that guidance. I didn't know what I was getting into. I saw a couple movies, didn't know what was happening. But I got out there, and it was a huge shock. But I think one of the most important things I really learned was I found that passion, right? I love that idea. Like, everybody else running one way, I'm going into the danger. I'm standing up to bullies, being able to defend, my family, being able to defend my home was something I fell in love with. And that really kind of planted that seed into doing this type of work. So I kind of owe that to my dad, like, just kind of planting that thing into me. And so really, even still, getting out of the Marine Corps, still wasn't thinking about doing policing. But I'm home, and just a crazy story about just how life sets you on these different paths. And sometimes, God has a plan for you that you may not see. And so in the Marine Corps, I worked around aircraft. And so my goal was like, I was going to come back home, work at our major airport, being out there, doing all this work, mechanic stuff, being this hotshot kid on the runway. But my last day in the Marine Corps was one of the most significant days in the history of America.
Oh, really?
I was in California, set to fly back home on Tuesday, September 11, 2001.
Wow.
That was my last day as a Marine. And so really what happened with that situation was, working in the airline, working around planes, like that was not going to happen. If we remember the industry during that time, it was decimated. And so I had to come up with another idea, like another job or something to be able to do. And guess who shows up again with a good idea? Good old dad, right? He's like, hey, see, Chicago police are hiring, but still, I'm like, nah, I'm good. I'm all right. I'm good. So he even goes to the point, man, where he says, hey, I'll pay your fee for you. This guy. So my dad pays my application fee, and I go through the process. And one of the things that's really a challenge today, but it worked out for me because I didn't know what I wanted to do. But it hurts a lot of especially African American officers now, is that the process is so long.
It is a long process.
Right. It was good for me because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So it gave me time to think through, and it gave me some time to get to that point. But everybody ain't got a year to wait for a job, right? Especially, people in our communities and our income levels. But things worked out for me, and that long process. I was working at a job that I thought was going to be, my thing, and and right before, towards the end, about 1 year, I'm back at home. This is now September of about 2002 now. And, I'm working this good job. I'm all right. I'm not really worrying about the police, and I'm going through the process, but not serious about it.
Right.
And so I get a call from the manager, man, at the space I'm working for. He called me in the office like, hey, Jermaine, sit down. You know what's about to happen, right? He's like, hey, we got to let you go. So it's like, oh, man, I was about to get married in a couple weeks. I had a brand new car. I had a kid on the way. Like all of these things I had going on.
All those factors against you right there. Yeah.
This guy just yanked the rug from underneath me. So, then to top that off, I'm riding home. Traffic's bad. We come to a standstill. I'm in my brand new car I just bought, right, with this job. And somebody rear ends me and just smashed the car. So it's like, oh, man. Worst day of my life, man. It could have been one of the worst days of my life, right? And just thinking about all the things that could go wrong. But I tell you, out of that, one of the next things I did was go back home, shuffle through the drawer to find that phone number to the investigator that was working on my application. So now my story was, I wanted to be a police officer my whole life. This is the greatest job ever. Like I'm giving it all of it, man. I'm giving them everything.
See, the truth comes 19 years later, huh?
and I tell you, it worked out. So this is September. I worked out, did the final phases in December of that year, December of 2002. I started the police academy, and I tell you, if it was one of those decisions, like looking backwards, 10 out of 10 times I would make that decision to join this job because it's just been an amazing opportunity every single day. Like, you understand, every single day we can change somebody's life for the better. Every single day. Like, not many jobs you can do that type of work. I think that's God's work too. So I'm just very fortunate enough that he put me in that path and got me in this seat today. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So I know I've told my story on this platform before, and they're probably tired of hearing it. But can you explain just a little bit about the process of actually going through from the application on to Warrior, at least for me, to being actually sworn in uniform? Can you explain the process of that, about how long it takes potentially?
Okay. Yeah. So back when I did it, this is almost 20 years ago. So the system has been updated somewhat, right, to kind of be somewhat. Because it's a process. Because you look like a large department like Chicago, we're the second largest department in the country. We've got over 12,000 officers that work for CPD. We're behind New York. They're like 30 something thousand. It's like a whole city. It's like a city, man. And then LA's behind us, and I think they're around 8,000 or so. So we're the second largest department. And so in that, during that means we get a lot of applications. So it's like a process of how do you go through that enormous thousands of applications. So a lot of it was really around how do you kind of weed out and eliminate people through the process. So it was designed for elimination. So I took a written test at the beginning of the year. This is around January or so of 2002. I took the written test. And again, it's just the kind of that basic way of kind of eliminating some people to go to the next phase. Then you follow that up the next month, right after you get your store with a physical run test, fitness test, right? Again, it's another way to kind of eliminate applicants to go through the process. And those are, I guess, when you look at it from a cost saving perspective, those are some of the things that aren't as expensive to do, right? Because now when you started getting into the medical clearance, now that's doctors involved. You start doing the background checks. That's an investigator that has to work on you. So it kind of goes through those processes, and the polygraph test again, right? These are just processes that they want to kind of get through to kind of narrow it down to the to the top candidates, applicants. And so in that process, again, this is a month. Next step, maybe a month and a half. The next step, right? So as you go through, 5-6 steps, that adds up quickly, right? Into a year. And so from that standpoint of taking that test in January and not starting the job until December of that year, that's a long time to wait, man. And if you don't have that luxury of being able to have a job already or have some sort of stable income, you might not be able to wait a year for this job. And I think because of that issue, we lose a lot of qualified applicants, especially from officers of color, just because of that barrier and that issue. And, they did our Inspector General's office did a study on our hiring practices in Chicago and really found that was a major issue. And one of those things that came out of that report, man, I talked to people about it, was that as much of the narrative that we hear about police and Black communities, we think Black people don't want to be police. But in Chicago, the highest represented demographic who applied to be police officers turned out to be Black.
Wow.
I'm like, what?
Wow. I would have never guessed that.
But what happens is that during that process, the different issues, the different systemic issues, the subjective nature of background checks, a lot of those end up dwindling us down until once we go into the police academy, we go from the highest to the lowest.
Right.
And that becomes just one of those systemic issues that really we have to start to address as we start to look for ways to get more Blacks involved. But it's no different in our history, right? When we study Black people, we know, like, you can go back, Civil War, man. You got people in bondage, slaves fighting for freedom. You got World War II. We can't sit on the front of the bus, but we flying planes over Germany, saving troops' butts. Like, we do this. Civil rights. We marching, getting beat. Like, Black people have always stood up to answer the call. So it shouldn't be any surprise that we want to go out and be police to serve our communities. But it's those issues and those barriers that get in the way that prevent us, right, from being able to step into this role of police officers. And I tell you, it's so valuable. My lived experiences, man, is one of the most important things that I take into this job, to be able to deal with things, to be able to understand, like, the cultural competency, being able to know when to apply pressure, when to take off, when to be like, hey, man, come on now. Being able to get that look, right, to people that that comes from being from the same streets. But, that's just a valuable tool that you can't learn in school, and, right, you can't learn in the police academy.
Yeah, just like and Bill Duke in Menace to Society, that the one scene, or one of my veteran officers, he used to always do that all the time. Like, you're not messed up, right? You're not messed up. And it's kind of like, wow, it's like an unwritten subtlety right there. Like, yeah, you're right. Like, make this make sense, and you can't. Like, come on, man, you can't. Don't try and throw a wall over my face or nothing like that. Yeah. So you discussed the process on actually going through your experiences on being a police officer, at least up until this point, and being in the military. But who or what have your mentors or influences are for you thus far to get you this position right here? And who do you look up to take you to the next level?
Yeah, so it fits out in like two different spaces, right? I think about it. One is from the standpoints of being an officer, like all the sergeants and the frontline supervisors that I had, like just coming up as a young rookie, going through those years, man, it's little parts and pieces from every single person that I take, right, and attach to be able to see, right. So I can remember this one sergeant who used to work on a desk, like he used to give people the flux, right, but this guy always knew his stuff. And it was ever something I needed a question or I needed to be able to figure out something, the first person I'm going to was him, because the guy was like an encyclopedia, right? And then I had this one female sergeant, man. She always, like, her people skills, her interpersonal, she was always on point to be able to figure things out and stay true, and like that courage, right? To be able to know when something not right right? To be able to step up for that. But when something's going on, like to be able to, whether it be officer or community, and like those little pieces, right, from the different managed supervisors that I had, I drew on that to be able to say, when I'm a sergeant, I want to be like that. I want to be like him. I want to do those type of things, right? So that kind of was one of those ways to like build up this mold of who I am. And then the other is one of the most important, like just sponsors, mentors of my career is he's now the chief. He's a chief here in CPD. It's Ernest Cato. His guy, he brought me on as a newcomer. He was promoted to commander right around the same time I made sergeant. And so he's trying to fill out the different roles in his district. And so he reached out to me as a new sergeant to come in and run and manage the community policing office. So we both like brand new in this space and trying to figure things out. And he brought me in, and I tell you, man, that was some of the greatest times of my life. Like the two of us just innovating things. Like we got to the point we'd be in sync on stuff. He'd be thinking about something, and like, and then, you know, just to be able to be in those and bouncing off each other. And it was just this great opportunity that he would put me in rooms and bring me to tables, let me participate in conversations. And sometimes I'd be the only sergeant there, right? Everybody else is of different ranks, but just being able to like have that opportunity to see that world and get a feel for it and understand it without the pressure, right? Of being in there to watch, right? And learn. And I tell you, it's just like just one of the most valuable people of my entire career. And just having that time to work with him over these past 5 years, and it's just helped me get on a whole nother trajectory. And I'm really grateful for that.
Well, shout out to him. Yeah. The excitement comes through, and to actually be in spaces that you normally wouldn't be and absorb it all with the least amount of pressure is a good thing. And you kind of segued into the question I was going to ask. You already mentioned that you're a sergeant, and what are your responsibilities? And you said community policing. And how tremendous of a job is that to actually be a community police officer in the same locale that you grew up?
Yeah, so one of those things, like community policing it's like a buzzword. It's a trend thing, right? Everybody's throwing it out there and putting it out. But what happens with buzzes and trends is that everybody don't always know what it means, right? It's just you just throw it out there, like community policing. I think that the challenge is what we have to understand is to avoid making this into a gimmick where you're just out, you know, kissing babies and taking pictures and putting stuff on social media. The heart of community policing is solving problems. Like your role is to identify a problem and solve it. Like that's your job, but you solve it through use of your community-based resources. So you're looking at root cause issues. You're looking at really social justice, right? You're looking at what are the things that contribute to people being involved in violence or be involved in crime, and how do we start to impact those areas? And so like really understanding the true nature of what the role is and the job is. So what it requires me to do is to like everything that's not policing, I'm working with. And so that's the rest of the world, right? We got one little piece, one sector, right? When they talk about public safety, but so much of the pie, right, goes into that education, healthcare, community organizing, social services, mental health, like all of these things, youth service, all of these things go into creating like a whole person and so those are the spaces that I work in. So it's an immense challenge. It's a lot to be able to do, but I really enjoy it because in that the relationships and the networks that I'm able to create, I think helps me in a different way from an average officer who doesn't have this luxury of meeting so many people, is because I now have a toolkit that not everybody else has. So when a problem occurs, I can plug pieces differently than someone who only knows enforcement or someone who only knows, police tactics. And I think that's the fun part. That's the enjoyable part of being able to solve problems and start making those pieces fit together.
Cool. And I think that's a big deal too, to actually know people, to have that network, to have that connection with individuals where you have a go-to person, or you have a website or whatever kind of information, you can get them straight to the source, as opposed to, like you said, if you only know enforcement, okay, well, I gotta call this person, or I gotta get you in line with this. There's about 5 or 6 different steps where you can go straight to the source and start solving the problem itself.
Yeah, that's a big deal because as an officer, man, one of the things I would do before I learned about this stuff is people would have like issues with their son or their kid, and they like, he out of control. And only thing I know was like, well, if you arrest them, they can like send them to boot camp. That was all I knew. That's all I knew. But it was like, come on, man, why we got to arrest you first before we can help? It's other ways that we can get from, especially in our communities, man. We can't keep feeding black men to to the prison system. It's got to be ways for us to do things differently. And it's just like learning that through community policing is just one of the most valuable tools.
What kind of events have you been involved in so far, as far as community events? Some good or some? I know we talked about the riots before. That's really not as far as community policing, but I mean, as far as any positive events, what kind of events have you been through?
Yeah. So one of the things, one of the most proud of, I'll share with you, is that with this idea. So I have a passion. I know you're a coach. I'm a coach too. I have a passion for youth, man. Just working with young people. Yeah. I think sports, the power of sports, and what that does with being able to help learn, practice on a field or on a court, lessons that you're going to use in life when the stakes are different, right? You miss a shot here, you mess up and lose the game, but you out on the street, these decisions are life and death. So I think, for the power of sports really helps teach young people that. And so I was really fortunate to be able to co-found a sports program called Chicago Westside Police and Youth Sports.
Okay.
So what this idea was, just this concept of what happens if, you get police officers working with community partners, serving that role as mentorship with kids through sports. And so we put together and got this league going. It serves all the communities that make up the west side of Chicago. So it covers a pretty large footprint in our city here. And so it provides free year-round sports programming. And we took this program and in just we're in our fourth season right now. We annually serve 1,000 boys and girls in free sports. With police officers coming out to coach, our faith-based leaders coming out to coach, our nonprofits, and we're out in parks, specifically parks that used to be ran and overrun by gangs. So we take those spots, we make them safe spaces. Now you got families out there, you got kids out there. It's just bringing to life, a lot of these voids in these areas and communities, and it's really taken off a lot. And we're super proud. We were featured on HBO Sports in a documentary that was Emmy nominated. So I'm Emmy nominated, right? So it's just like, so just having that opportunity to really catch on, to really show like just that power of sports and what happens when like so much, gets solved and gets worked through relationships, but you need some way to set that up, right? How do you create a space where we can meet on some type of neutral ground, common language, especially through sports, right? Everybody knows basics, right? Basketball, football, we all know, regardless of where you come from, we understand the rules of the game. And that's a great foundation to start from with common things. And so out of that, you start to get to know each other. And it's just a great feedback. We do surveying with community members and with families after the sports. And so again, we're in a community, Black community, police relationships, is a struggle. And so what we found out through surveying is just like when people come into the program after just doing 1 3-month season, 2 out of 3 of those people who have a negative outlook on police change to positive, just playing sports for 3 months. And now they got a positive outlook with police. And that actually also inversely helps with the police officer too, to start to see the community in different ways. It's not a 911 call. It's not danger. These kids aren't offenders and they're not doing things right that we typically see, but we're seeing real life and we're seeing so much of the beauty and the vibrancy that lives in these communities. And it's just making this holistic kind of transformation that I'm really excited about, just having an opportunity to start up a project like that.
Man, you said a lot. And it's tremendous because it's true. It's 100% true. I mean, especially sports, we're relatable with sports. I'm a football guy myself, and I mean, when you start talking football, or just by coaching, like I told you, I coached 7 years beforehand, a few years ago, and it's the same communicate. It's the same style. I can relate because I've done it. I can help give you techniques. We want to win the game. Our passion comes through. Boys are boys, men are men. You get that fight in you that where you want to win, and then you connect. And then after you connect, you can actually have like real life conversations, as opposed to, we want to get a touchdown. However, you can't be messing up in school because you're not going to stay eligible. And I mean, going to this class is like moving 10 yards. Going to this class, if you get in trouble, it's kind of like getting a 5-yard penalty and you're hurting the team. And they're like, wow, I never thought about it that way. I'm like, exactly. And then to watch them grow, they see me as Coach Clee first before they see me as Officer Tilman. And so when they see me out, they're like, what's up, coach? Still coach. I'm still coach. And if something's going on, they're like, hey, Coach Clee, I mean, I saw this is going on. Like, you need to keep your eye on this. This is what's going on at the parks at this time of the night. Like, feel, and you develop a relationship, and it really helps, tremendously helps. And you have that passion because it's not a job. You're not dealing with John Q. Public, as people like to say. You're actually dealing with people that you know, and you're making a significant difference in their life.
Yeah, it's all relationships that come through that, and specifically just lessons from a Marine, right? Lessons from military. Being a coach and a mentor, like that's what a supervisor is. That's what's needed, right? Especially in young people. We talk a lot about, you know, how this generation and, you know, these kids are wild and they out of control. But you remember when we were young, they said the same thing about us. They wild, they out of control. They out here listening to gangster rap, NWA. They wearing their clothes back. It was the same conversation, right? That the older generation were saying about us back then. And I think we can't forget that and then do the same thing, right, to this next generation. But in the end, right, they're young people and they're looking for mentorship. One of the things I do is, you know, I do restorative practices, peace circles, just having those conversations to sit around, and had an opportunity to go to the juvenile detention center, right? It's the, you know, it's where our juvenile offenders are housed here. And we did some peace circles and conversations. And out of that, we were trying to ask them, what do you need to keep from coming back here? Like, what are you looking for? And I tell you, as cliche as it sounds, man, the overwhelming response they asked for was a mentor. Because you got to remember, these are kids that are quote unquote bad. So they develop a reputation. When people see them, they go the other way. And so out of that, they miss those adult relationships. They miss being able to go to somebody to help them work through a problem. And so what they do, they turn to their peers who be like, nah, man, let's roll on them, right? That ain't good advice, right? But because they don't have the adults there that are willing to invest in them, you know, they miss out on getting that adult mentorship. And I tell you, that key of tapping into that, specifically through sports or other ways, like that's the thing that young people need. And we can't get blinded by thinking that this generation is so, like, they aliens, like they don't have these same basic youth development needs of wanting to be, that's why they join gangs, right? They want to be supported. They want to be part of a family. They want to be celebrated. They want somebody to show them how to make money. Like all of these things they get from the gang, because we as adults, you know, don't want to do. And it's just, let's give them that instead. Like, let's be the, you know, the positive alternative to the stuff that they get from gangs, and they'll attach to it. They're going to want to be a part of it.
Yeah. And shout out to Dolores Taylor. She told me to tell you that she said Semper Fi. We were in the academy together. She's also a former Marine. And Marcel Doc Coleman, my man, we just did that 60 and 30 run. Shout out to him. This is an eye-opening conversation, man, Doc. But yes, can you explain to us what three goals you have in this career, if you've already achieved them or if you're still working toward them? And of those goals, what's the most significant goal that you're looking to that you're striving for?
Yeah, so I think the big areas that I work into are just these pillars. One is police reform, right? Being able to do our job most equitably, that best serves communities, that also promotes public safety, but promotes a good quality of life. So police reform is one of those big things. Community-based violence prevention, being able to kind of really take this, some people may have heard of this public health approach to violence. How do we holistically start to deal with this issue of gun violence that's really destroying and decimating families and communities, specifically in Black communities? And then the other part is youth service, man. I love working with young people and just figuring out ways to best serve, you know, that up and coming generation. And so really in that space, I think they all kind of work together, right? It just in some way, because, you know, we're talking about just the context of how do you promote healthy communities? And often we see that in more affluent neighborhoods, like all of these things we desire to see occurs naturally there, but we somehow expect or believe as if, you know, in our communities, it's not possible, right? And so we deny the resources, we deny the investment, we deny the trust, right? And to allow communities to kind of provide for themselves. And I think that becomes one of those big issues. So just really around this idea of gun violence, I think that's one of the most major issues that's affecting us. And it's hard to find somebody in Chicago that hasn't been affected, right? Either directly, indirectly, somebody they know. Like it's this thing, you go into a classroom or a school, and you ask kids to raise their hand, you know, how many know somebody who's been killed? And you're going to see a lot of hands get raised when you're looking at a city like in Chicago. But when you start asking about positive things, like, you know, how many people in your family been to college, or how many people you like, all those things, the hands dwindle. So we got to replace that, right? We got to flip that on the inverse. And I think really that is working on these root cause issues specifically through social justice. Sometimes we throw that out there, people throw the word out there, and it causes this visceral reaction like, what does that mean? But in the reality, it's about serving those root cause issues. That's social justice. It's access and it's opportunity. You provide that to people, humanity will rise to the top, right? We will perform. We have proven it through history. You give somebody a shot, you give somebody a chance, they're gonna excel in it. And so I think that's just one of those issues as I work with different partners and start to think about, okay, we got to suppress crime. We got to work with things, we got to go after shooters, of course, but if we only going after shooters, what's stopping the next kid from becoming the next shooter? We only looking at the end. We only looking at the final result, but we got to go back to the beginning and start preventing this kid from ever picking his gun up in the first place. And I think a lot of those solutions are in these root cause issues around youth service and just around how we approach public safety. So it's really a lot of time I spend a bunch of energy just trying to figure out how to get those resources into the hands of people that can use them, that need them the most, that are most effective with it, and shift some of that power and some of that control away from our current systemic issues and start and being into the hands of people who have the lived experiences, right? People who walk those streets that can most relate. So,
right, very proactive thinking, a very proactive approach. And I know we kind of talked backstage about it a few years ago when the United States was being plagued with all the riots and everything was going on everywhere. I know you were involved in a few situations. I know I shared a few of my situations that I was involved in as well. And through the course of it, you see some, like I saw people that I knew that when I recognized them, they skedaddled. Then I saw a lot of people who I've never seen before in the area, and we're standing in front of the Capitol with our shields and all. And we got spit on, got water bottles thrown at us, we got glass thrown at us. We had different things happening all throughout I forget how long we were there. It felt like forever, but I think we were down there for about 6 hours or so. You care to share any of your experiences throughout that situation? Or situation similar to that?
May of 2020, specifically May 31st, 2020, that Sunday, man, I tell you, that was one of those days I'll never forget in my entire career. So we had been getting a few protests, following the murder of George Floyd. A lot of things had been going around the country. And so we had some issues in downtown Chicago. And so the decision was made that they were going to raise the bridges to keep protesters from getting downtown. They were just, tearing up things and looting some of the most Michigan Avenue, some of the most expensive stores in the world out there. So the decision was made, like, let's raise the bridges up. And so a lot of issues had came around regarding that decision. But what ended up happening is that a lot of those protests then spilled into neighborhoods and into communities. Yeah. And so that, so I got out that morning. So some issues had happened that night before. So we're out trying to, deal with protests and deal with some looting issues that were going on. But out of nowhere, man, a group just descended on us. We were on a spot, a business corridor, and again, in a Black community, like typical businesses that you would see, sadly, clothing stores, cell phone shops, hair care, those type of businesses that are most common in, within our community, liquor stores, that type of stuff, right? So we're in an area that's a business corridor there, and, and a group shows up, just doing a little antagonizing, within the officers. But again, people that I don't recognize, right? That's not from the neighborhood, not from the community. Because I'd work on this, I would know who they were, right? If they were from the neighborhood. But again, these people coming in, man, and it's just quickly, like almost at the snap of a finger, you saw a group just rolled up, and all of a sudden in the sky is bricks and bottles. I mean, it's something out of a movie, right? When you watch the Gladiator movies and you see the arrows through the sky, man, that's how bricks were looking. And it was a rough situation. And so we were able to get officers out, set up skirmish lines, set lines up to try and protect those corridors. And I tell you, we were in this position of just, I don't know where that many bricks and bottles and rocks came from. Yeah. And I don't know, the construction site, somebody brought them in. I don't know, so much of this stuff is calculated, right? Somebody showed
absolutely
the bricks. But it was like, man, where they get all these bricks from? In this situation, a few things happened, man, that was just unbelievable. One of those incidents, while we were out on the line, there was a shooting, because this still in the community, gang issues, right? Individual gets shot about, maybe 50 feet, 50, 75 feet away from our line. and it's so much chaos, and it's in an alley. And so now we're in this situation. Reports are coming out. People are yelling, running up to us. Officers, help, help, help. This guy's been shot. But the bricks wouldn't stop, man. They would not stop throwing bricks and bottles at us until, finally we get the ambulance there. And so, one of the lieutenants, he's like, look, we got to help this guy. So they set up shields. Again, like got the shields. They got the paramedics. They walked through this blitz of bottles and bricks to get over there and treat this guy who's been bleeding out in this alley for far too long, right? And so they get over there and try to treat him. Unfortunately, this guy dies, man. He dies in that alley, and the bricks still didn't stop. So finally, during that day, so much, mayhem and chaos had taken place, and you started to see so much of just humanity and effects of those type of situations. A couple things happened that almost made me cry, man. It was this dad who comes up to the line. Now this is about evening time. We've been out there probably about 10 hours or so. This is about 7, 8 o'clock at night. This dad comes up to the line and he's asking which one of the restaurants or grocery stores are open, because he's got kids at home who hadn't eaten that day. And so he's trying to figure out how he's going to feed his family. Man, I had to turn that guy and send him home to hungry kids because everything was closed or looted or shut down. We had a senior citizen who had been out that morning on the other side of town. And so once the riot and the things that started, they had to shut the bus services down. So this elderly lady was trapped on the other side of town, and she had walked miles to get back home. And she comes up to us and she's like, officer, can you help me? And so now, officers are like, man, I'm not going out there. And so I had to talk to a couple of them and say, look, bro, regardless of what happens out here, regardless of what happens, we still the police. She needs help. She needs us. So I get them in an unmarked van, and they put the elderly lady in there to take her home to get her safe into her house. But it was just like those situations to remind us like what this job was and what our community, how it was affected by it, was just unbelievable. And then lastly, during that time we were standing out there, I had a lot of community friends and just people who were supporters of us who were Black, who came up, brought sandwiches, brought food, just brought things to the front line to help support the officers and just say thank you, for trying to protect the community as best as they can. And so much played out, man. And this is one day that started off a series of weeks and weeks and weeks of these incidents that were going on. And I tell you, the one thing that I noticed so much about those interactions is that whenever I was at a protest or incident where people from community was there, it was always peaceful. It was always love. It was anger. It was emotion. It was a lot of those issues and the things that were happening, but it was peaceful. But when I start seeing people that weren't from communities, that specifically weren't from Black communities show up, it turned angry, it turned violent, it just turned in a different way. And what we really started to see was like so much of our narrative, right, as a Black America gets captured and taken over and manipulated and twisted in so many different ways from our story. But in the end, we've always been a peaceful people to demand rights and do. We learned from Dr. King, man, our hero. Everybody got a picture somewhere of Dr. King in their house. His entire nonviolent approach is things we aspire to. And that's what we model so much of what we do after. And I think those messages shows how much can happen, through that peaceful process. And so really embracing that role as an officer, my job is to protect that ability, right? To be able to be in this position today, that if Dr. King was with me and him would have our hands together and we march together. And so whenever those opportunities come, I'll march with my community. We're going to be together and we're going to do these things, hand in hand in unison, because I'm here for that purpose. That's my role and that's my responsibility, is to protect that. And so really doing that entire time, and it was just such a social, just learning a school, like in the field, learning about America and learning about life that I'll never forget, but I really value that experience in that time.
Again, that's a lot, man. That's a lot. He unloaded a lot of real life experience, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, this is 100% truthful. This is 100% experience. This is 100% fact. Make sure you tag, like, and share. Put a number 1 in the chat room, just for his experiences and him being willing to share these experiences, because not everyone sees this side. Not everyone understands this side. And I know a lot of people, they watch the protests or riots, whatever you want to call them, from TV, and you had an emotional response just from sitting on your couch. Imagine actually physically being there, standing there, actually it was hot. I remember at least here, it was at least 95 degrees or above that day. You're in full riot gear. You have people in front of you. It is a very hostile situation. You don't know. You don't know how it's going to go. You really don't. You're standing there. You're doing your best. I can only speak for me. I was there with a lot of other different departments of guys that I never met before until that day. And then you're standing there and you know that, let's just say for sake of numbers, it's 50 cops standing in one line, and you got maybe 1,000 people coming at you. The numbers don't add up, but you know you can't retreat, you can't go. You have to stand there, and you got to see America in its rawest form. You got to see a lot of primal and emotional raw activity that took place. Yeah.
It was just, man, that's just one of those times, man. And just to have that in modern history, to be able to be present for that, and to be able to draw from that and use those experiences and add that to your own lived experiences to be able to go to kind of go through. I think we learned a lot from, just as law enforcement professionals, we learned a lot. And especially around this idea around police reform, right? Around, just the transparency issue, how we use force, our abilities to de-escalate. So much has come out of that situation. But again, within our department, we're currently under a consent decree. And so a lot of those steps to work better within community, to improve the way we police, have already been underway. But there's still challenges, right, within that process, because there's a lot of tension from police culture for police reform, right? And that kind of plays out in a lot of ways, or where we start to see just this idea around reform being a negative, right? But so much of, if you actually look at the things that are in our consent decree, is really around how do we promote officer wellness? How do we promote relationships within communities? How do we do our job better? Like, these are good things. Right? These are things we want. Promotions, right? These are good things, right? But why are we fighting, resisting? And I think it just becomes a lot of the rhetoric, right? When you start to hear news media, social media, like a lot of those things that go through rhetoric and talking points, we don't really take the time to read and educate ourselves on particular topics. I think it does more harm than good, which is why sometimes we end up in the mud and treading water around these reform issues, when so much of it is really benefits everybody involved.
It really does, yeah. Yeah, and which leads me to my next question is, since at least 2020, since the protests / riots, depends on whatever you want to call it, how do you see the public treating law enforcement officials, and vice versa, the other hand? How do you see law enforcement officials treating the public? Do you think it's actually gotten a little bit better, or do you think it's a stalemate, or do you think it's a little worse?
It's one of those two worlds again. So here's what I see on the ground. So if I park my car and I get out and walk a street with real life people who live in the houses in these neighborhoods, it's a totally different relationship.
I get it.
These are people who are dealing with real life violence, who dealing with the hundreds of people who get murdered in Chicago, the thousands of people who get shot. They live with that in real life, not on the couch, not on social media, like you said, in real life. Those people, when I show up, it's like, thank you so much and hugs. Don't leave. Like, you gonna stay, right? Let me go. Let me get you some water. Right?
Dinner.
Because they living with real life consequences, the real life consequences of decisions and of policy and politics. Yeah. So that's a different relationship that I have amongst, I call it my people, my neighbor. I still live in this neighbor. These my neighbors. So those are the real life relationships that exist. And whenever I have an issue or feel down or need to recharge, park that car, get out and walk a block and talk to people. Talk to the moms, the dads, the families, the kids, and the people who have a stake in the game, who suffer the consequences, and you get a whole different perspective. And then there's the rest of them, everybody else, right? That's living in a comfortable life, that has the luxury of commuting into a situation whenever they feel like it, whenever they want to go online, to be able to pop in and pop out. Yeah. And it's a lot tougher because they don't deal with the consequences. And that's where the trouble becomes. And that's where I have the most challenges, really working with people who are outside of the real life relationships. And so I think there's a delicate balance between that, because sadly, that other part, right, that loud minority versus silent majority, it starts to dictate policy, and it starts to make choices. It starts to compel our politicians to do crazy ideas like defund police. It starts to compel our politicians to do, ideas about removing resources and how we support police. And all that does is hurt people in the Black community. It's hurting us, right, in those situations. And so now it's just trying to figure out how we start to get back to a real world perspective of people understanding consequences is really what the challenge is. And then out of this too, now, because we've skewed so far that the violence is now at levels back when I was a kid, back in the 90s, we're seeing homicide totals match, like I'm talking the old days, colors and all that. Like we match the same type of violence during those times. And that shouldn't be in the amount of technology and advancements we have as a society. We should not be regressing, 30 years and 40 years down. And so now we're in a tough situation where now we're trying to recorrect the system. And are we going to go too far, right? This whole game of going too far in each direction is that now we're starting to hear similar rhetoric, like the rhetoric we start to hear in the 90s, right? That we start to hear early that led to mass incarceration. Now it's like, we got to lock them up. We need longer sentences. We need ways to keep them in. And it's just, who are we talking about? We're talking about Black communities, is that we need to somehow imprison them to create safety, when it's not the idea where we need to be supporting young people. We need to providing, real alternatives to these issues. And so I think a lot of that struggle is coming in of trying to find our balance and most importantly, finding our voice. And so really to commend you, like setting up platforms like this, Clee, to be able to provide opportunities for Black officers, for people in this profession to be able to speak out on these things, to help educate the public, right, about what's really going on and what's really happening from our cultural perspective. I think it's very important because platforms like this, typically didn't exist, right, before. And I think becomes one of those things that even comes out of the pandemic, right, came out of that unrest, is that more Black officers are now looking for ways to speak up. And I think our words and our voices are valuable because we provide a level of competence, cultural competence to this idea of policing that you only get through lived experiences, and you only get through being able to walk the walk and truly understand what the issues are.
Well said. Well said. Couldn't have said it better myself. And thank you very much. I appreciate that. And with that, also, how do you feel that we all know the effect on everything that's going on in these past few years, and they kind of have been narrowed into these past few years because it's been going on for a little while longer. But you see the applications have dropped significantly throughout the nation. How do you think we can find more qualified applicants, younger officers, to start filling these slots? Because we're getting older now. Eventually, I can't be running over and jumping over cars and fences like I used to. I need some young 20-year-olds to be able to do this stuff.
Yeah, that's one of those tough things that we have to do. And I think one of those ways that we start to appeal, and one of those ways we really start to help re-energize our profession, is providing some authenticity to just what the job is and what our roles are as police. And what that requires is individuals with real life experiences sharing their stories, like stuff like this, platforms like this, opportunities to be able to sit down, chop it up, have a conversation, barbershop conversation, whatever it may be, to kind of really talk through, because you got to demystify, what the job is and what the roles are. Because before, the common things you'd hear just as an honorable profession, and it's celebrated and it's easier to kind of want to get into something. But now we're in these situations where it's going to take a lot more inside you to be able to do a job like this. It's going to tap into that courage, that integrity, that fortitude. Now that starts going to get tapped into. And sometimes we start to recruit based on this, how much money you make, and this what the benefits are. But we got to start appealing to that inner humanity, because those are the people that we're going to need to really get us where we need to be as a profession. So some of these conversations have to be through, like, these are my perspectives. This is how I deal with challenges. Sometimes we might even have to do into it is like, me and my mom might have to come out and have a conversation. So other moms can be like, how do you deal with your son being like, we got to have real talk, real conversations. And I think that can start to get us into the point to help demystifying the profession and really tapping into just that that fight and that inner desire to create change and that transformation, like all of those things that are inside us. We really have to tap into that and be intentional about figuring out ways to pull that out.
Good answer. Good answer. See, I don't you didn't stole the thunder. I don't know what else I can ask. I'm serious. This is a good interview. This is a serious interview. It's good conversation because again, not a lot of people here. We hear these conversations with amongst ourselves, but the nation doesn't hear these conversations. They don't get this perspective. I love being a police officer. I wanted to be one since I was 4 years old. Second generation, my dad was, and I think it's necessary. I think it's important because again, I give back to the community in which I grew up in, and it's a wonderful feeling to actually wear like my high school alma mater on my pack. It's the same thing. It's a sense of community, and it's a prideful feeling.
Yeah, it's absolutely so much, man. I said it in the beginning. Every single day, you can change somebody's life for the better. Every day, like it's not many opportunities. It's not many ways that you can work in a career or have a job where you're able to do things on a small scale, large scale, but you can make a difference in somebody's life. Yeah, it might not be making the news. These simple opportunities that you have to support someone, the simple opportunities you have to understand and take time to hear somebody out, to help talk them down out of a troubling situation, to help be that, just to be that comfort in their lives. Like that stuff is changing lives every day, and we get to do that. That's an honor, and I'm just proud and just fortunate enough to be able to do it.
So it sounds like de-escalation skills. Have you used de-escalation skills on maybe another officer or anyone in the public or just on the call while you're out on patrol itself? How important? Well, we know how important communication is, but how important is it with de-escalation in a situation?
Yeah, so much of that. I think it's one of those things, right? That we just, as I learned from veteran officers before me, like again, so I got almost 20 years on a job. So I started in the early 2000s. 90s officers from the 80s kind of taught me. So these skills have been around for a long time. This isn't new just because of, the civil unrest or these issues. So, being able to know and understand, and just one of the most powerful tools that we have that we use most often is our mouth, right? We bumping our guns, right? That's just that way that, it's these situations. You can't fight everybody, right? You can't, always do it, do everything by force. And so much being able to coax and convince and talk people down into these situations. I mean, it happens so often, but it doesn't always get, shown or televised or amplified. Because if you look at the amount of guns, the amount of all of these things that are recovered in Chicago, about thousands, and every one of that, each time we recover a gun, that's a possible deadly force, situation. But how do we, being able to do those things, but you don't hear about them because they're not hot button issues. And so a lot of these things happen, even from the standpoint of mental health, right? From, talking to somebody who's in crisis, amount of people I've, encountered, and I'm sure you've encountered with no clothes on, with knives running down the street. Like that's not an odd thing, right? As a police officer to see.
No, it's not.
But in those situations, what we're able to do, and so often, is to be able to get that person that ends up walking into that ambulance, laying on that gurney with that sheet over them, that we do so often with no force needed, right? And those situations are skills that we learn just over time. And the thing we have to be careful of, right, especially within young officers, is that the rhetoric and those issues, that we don't lose sight of that ability and that natural, skill set that we develop over time with experience. Because one of the trouble things that's happening with so much that I'm seeing, I'm sure across the country, is that we're starting to see a lot of cases where officers are starting to lay down. They're starting to say, hands off, I'm not going to do that. And, and again, you can be upset with the mayor, you can be upset with the president, but you can't take that out on this lady. You can't take that out on this little kid and say, I'm not going to protect them. And so in those situations, that we got to remember who we work for, right? You don't work for the mayor, you don't work for the city, you work for communities, right? You work for the people. And so remembering and keeping those things in sight, that we have to make those sacrifices and we got to do those things, right, to protect communities. And so the risk that's happening is that our veterans are not pouring into the younger officers like they used to. They're not getting those lessons. And so what we start to see is the use of force incidents, especially the controversial ones or the excessives, they're younger officers, right? They're younger, like newer on the job, that haven't had a chance to understand those nuances in those situations because the vets aren't passing their knowledge down. And so that's just an injustice. I think that if we don't share those skill sets with the younger officers coming up, we're sending them out, we're throwing these guys out to the wolves. And so that's really a responsibility of every veteran to be able to mentor and help coach, right, that next officer so they can be more effective.
So let me ask you this. We talked about qualified applicants going for the job, and that would be those newer officers that could or could not be getting in those troubles. But do you think retention with the seasoned and veteran officers plays a lot into it as well, where they don't actually nurture the newer officers because they're looking to get out? I know a few guys that are looking to get out the door, and they're looking to get out the door quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where it gets to. So a lot of it, traditionally, like policing is a profession you get into, you doing it to the pension. So I got you for 20, 25 years. Once I get you into those doors, what we start to see, like one of those newer trends is people are not doing this towards pension right anymore, right? You start to see people coming in, doing a few years, 5 here. And this whole thing, man, it's policing then turned into like free agency in the NBA, man. You got other departments poaching other departments. It's like, man, what is this? Like they giving signing bonuses. Come to Vegas, come to Florida. Like, man, it's crazy out here in the market. And just because of that, that shortage, right, of police officers, and you're starting to see this competitive thing. I mean, like even our department, we all in other cities, right? We might be down by you looking for some officers, to help fill out the ranks. But that's just the challenge of that, of getting back. And I think the piece that's missing out of that is really starting to see our job as the profession that it is, right? Really seeing and going about it in that way. I've even had some talks, right, that from now on our new applicants need to sign a contract for like the amount of time they're going to work, right? Because an agency like Chicago, like we're a large group, and so the trainings and the things that we provide are sometimes more in depth than one of the suburban communities. So if I'm in the suburbs, I can get a highly trained officer and just poach them off like from Chicago police. And so you start to see things like that happening. And we're investing a lot into new recruits, and then for them to ditch us and go to a smaller suburb with all that training. So it's just so much that we got to really kind of break this down and start to think about it if really from just from a business, a more corporate perspective, like HR, like how do you recruit, retain, like what are those things that conversations that officers look for, how you provide those proper benefits, because we got to make this job enticing, exciting, like for people to want to do, because it's so important and it's so necessary that if we can't keep our numbers up and we can't effectively retain or recruit our officers, it's going to make us very ineffective. And that's playing out now in Chicago, where the amount of days off that are being canceled. It's typical that you don't get a day off it takes you about 14 to 21 days to get a day off during the summer, just because of the canceled days off. And that's not sustainable, man. That's not, you can't, your mental health, the time you spend with your families, like all of these things are going on that it just makes it hard for you to do. Like it gets sometimes during the summer, like I can't even find time to wash my clothes. Like I need uniforms. I need a day off so I can do laundry, right? It's just one of those things that's become so difficult, right, to be able to do the job. And it really falls back on just our ability to kind of keep our officers and then and also recruit just qualified applicants.
Yeah. And kind of segue again, like you were talking about use of force, with some seasoned officers and some newer officers, I've heard individuals say that, with the way the nation's going, with the way the United States is going, they don't want to get caught up in a lawsuit, whether it's criminal or civil or whatever, that they're actually willing to take the first hit. And I'm not talking about the first punch in the face. Like they were willing, like, hey, the way it's going to look on the news, someone's cell phone or body cam or whatever it is, that they're willing for the first dangerous act to actually go through to a certain degree before they react. And that could be that, as well as I do, that first reaction could be a fatal one, or not even fatal, but life altering, seriously life altering. And it's a shame. I understand why some individuals say that. I do get it, but I mean, it's a shame that level of thinking has to come into play, because at the end of the day, we all want a peaceful resolution. We all have families. We all have friends. We all want to get back home the same way we left, and we want the same thing for the individual that we're dealing with. And so our goal is to have a peaceful resolution, but to actually go to that place in your mind where you're willing to accept some sort of injury before you react. I think that's unacceptable, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I think that's such a danger, right? That comes from rhetoric, that comes from politics, and that comes from so much, right? You have officers that are doing that. We had a situation. This is actually even before. This is before George Floyd, but it was following Mike Brown and a lot of the Ferguson issues. We had a female officer, right, in a situation where she was involved in an altercation with an offender, and he nearly beat her to death because she didn't want to pull her weapon or didn't use force against him because she was worried about what would happen or how that would affect her family or the job in a situation. And it got to the point where she was never able to return back to work because of that situation. And that was just one of those things that is just like it's like, how do we get proper messaging out and have the conversations? But again, as a professional, like a lot of this is not a job where you just come out and do it. This is just like sports, Clee, like powers. When you show up for a game or you show up for whatever in sports, you don't just come out there and play. You're practicing, you're watching film, you're working out, you're studying your opponent, you're understanding things. And the same idea from policing as professionals, we got to do that same work. We got to get out of the space, right, of the emotional reaction, and we got to be trained professionals. I got to be able to turn it on and pull it back instantly, right? And that comes through from just training and practice, right? That comes through the amount of firearms work that we do, like from a safety standpoint. We all know officers who pull a gun out once a year to go to the range and qualify. Handcuffing techniques, being able to quickly apply cuffs, that right there can eliminate the fight.
Yes,
you can get your cuffs out in those situations. And you see a lot of videos in these incidents that occur where you got officers bumbling around with handcuffs and a fight breaks out. Like these type of skills helps eliminate a lot of the issues, but it's just that professional standpoint of understanding and knowing case law, understanding constitutional policing, knowing these things so when they happen, you can articulate them, right? You can explain why you're doing things. If you're in a situation and something happened and you use force and you don't know why and you scratching your head, that's the problem.
That is a huge
problem. Right, as a professional, these are calculated decisions that we're supposed to be out there making, and I think that provides confidence. Like taking the time to know what you're doing, understand your job, understand policy, understand the rules. You grow confidence, right, in order to be able to do it and know how to work through those situations. And I think a lot of that really comes into this idea that we really got to see ourselves as professionals. We got to hone skills and we got to work at things to be prepared for those moments. The little ones, the weird scenarios, whatever it may be, the more comfortable we are with those situations, the quicker we're going to be able to respond. Like I learned just control tactics from the old school cops, how to use leverage, right? How to little basic things, right? To keep people from moving around and doing all these type of things. Talking to people while you moving at the same time. Keep those basic things, like those was one of the basic conversations I would have, like you talking, keeping their mind going, like saying like, hey brother, in this situation, till we figure things out, don't put these cuffs on you. I got the key right here, but we're gonna get this situation under control. And right there, no fight. Everybody go home with those without these other situations. But it's the conversation and the communication and being able to kind of work through things that we really got to practice and work on and help to teach the younger officers how to articulate the decisions that they make.
Right. Man, good interview. Good answer. Thank you. And right now, I know we've been going on for a little over an hour. We're going to pause for the calls. Stand by, ladies and gentlemen. Don't go anywhere. Get your questions ready. I got one more question, but we're going to go to, if I can find it quick. Here we go. Stand by. I got a surprise for you. Hi, I'm Sergeant Be Safe, and I'd like to give you some tips to help you be safe. I'll be introducing you to some helpful options that you can weigh out so you can be safe. Here's my office. I hope you like it. So let's have a seat and begin. So let's say you're riding along and you get pulled over. Don't be surprised if you see another officer. It's just an extra set of eyes to keep everyone safe. Always keep your hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. I know it's digital age, but always keep a copy of your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. Makes things go quicker, easier, and more efficient. So that way we can quickly get you on your way to have a safe day.
All right, I hope you guys like that one. You know, I'm always constantly working on something just to kind of lighten it up a little bit and to kind of provide a little bit of education. Got a few more. I need some voiceovers. They can't always be mine. So if you're out there and you do voiceovers, let me know. I got a couple videos that I haven't posted yet because I needed different voices in there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you guys for tuning in. We had a very informative live. We had a very fun live and educational. Through the course of conversation, I may have skipped some questions or I may have jogged your memory, Jermaine. Is there anything that you would like to share with us right now? The floor is yours.
Yeah. So in this, again, the idea about having this opportunity to have conversation and communication and how important that is, I encourage anybody who's watching to take the time and make the effort to reach out and have a conversation with a police officer, right? Demystify the profession and let's get back on this humanity level, this human interaction level. And because underneath it, you know, dads, brothers, uncles, like we're all those that wear their uniform, and so no different from so many so everyone who's out within communities. And so really it's just going to take us each to start extending that olive branch and reaching out to each other to have these conversations and have these discussions. And I think coming out of that, we're all going to grow that much closer, and we're going to get to the point where we really need to be as a country, as a society. And it's going to be through the relationships and through the conversations.
There you go. There you have it. Absolutely right. I agree with you. And I mean, life is cyclic. So, I mean, things may look a little bleak and bad right now. Good days are on the horizon coming down the pipeline. Hopefully they're here sooner than later, but they're definitely on their way. Jermaine, thank you for making yourself available. I know you got a lot going on during the summertime. I appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your experiences here on the platform. I enjoyed having a conversation with you. I enjoyed learning some of your experiences and some of your things that you've learned throughout the course of your career. Thank you for making yourself available. And please, you're welcome to come back anytime.
All right. I appreciate that. Much love, Coach Clee. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, you guys have a good night. You stay tuned in. We'll have other people coming to the platform. Make sure you guys get your questions ready. We love you. Have a good night. Stay safe. And we will talk to you on the next show.